Hello, my dear subscribers. The Réti opening starts with knight of 3, and it can become many different things. But if black plays d5, like usually, then if white plays c4, then this is the characteristic uh, Réti opening. And white is trying to attack this pawn from the flank, and also fianchetto this bishop to put more pressure on the light squares in the center. And here black can play c6 or e6, supporting the d5 pawn, or take on c4, or just push it forward to d4. All of those are playable. d4 looks quite good for black, and I guess the classical way of playing here is just taking on c4, and here white has several possibilities. He can just play e3 like in the uh, queen's gambit and capture that pawn soon, or also knight a3 is something that I think Réti favored himself, and queen a4 is also okay. Maybe in the spirit of Réti, I'd like to look at knight a3 a little bit. Here it's very good for white. Good tries for black are moves such as maybe a6 or g6. Let's look at those. Knight c4, and this is drawish. White and black have the same percentage, and most of the times it's a draw, because here black can play b5, knight e3, develops bishop, g3, knight f6, and for example castle, knight d7, b3, bishop b7, bishop b2, and this kind of position. So a6 is good against knight a3. Also g6 looks playable. It's even a little bit better for black. So knight takes c4, black just develops his king's bishop. White does the same, and yeah, it doesn't look like white has any advantage, because the idea of this opening is to attack the center from afar, but black has made no commitment uh, concerning the center, so there's no center to attack really. So, well, here black can play e5, threatening e4, but and this is quite good for black. He did establish one central pawn, but perhaps that's more difficult to attack. This bishop has no influence on it, and white can't play something like b3 developing this bishop, because then e4 comes and hits the knight and also the rook indirectly. So that's why bishop d2, and if rook e8, then b4, rook b1, and this is ended in a draw. So that's also another good way to counter knight a3. And also, well, e3 is most common, so this is much better for white. It takes the c pawn and develops more classically. White can take on c5. I read a book by Richard Réti. I think it's called something like Games of the Masters or something. Or what is it? The Masters of the Chessboard. Excellent book. Has many tactical games. Uh, Very romantic tactical games. Also, he introduces his own system with convincing example games. I guess he didn't post any losses from that opening bet, but I guess he won most of those games that he played with this opening. Also against Capablanca once in 1924. So something like this could happen. And what if black doesn't take on c4? What if he indeed pushes forward with d4? Then white's going to attack this later. This is called the advanced variation in the Réti. Here just g3 is best. e5, okay, so holding on to that pawn. d3, not allowing that pawn to advance anymore, and also opening this diagonal. Knight f6, but bishop b4 is even better here. Just bishop b4 check, and let's see what happens after that. Bishop d2, a5, stubbornly holding on to that bishop and developing. Okay, but most common is knight f6, and here castle, a5, e3, now taking a stand in the center. Let's see what black does. Black can take on e3, but this is more common. Bishop e7. Now white usually takes on d4. There's still going to be a pawn on d4, but let's see if white can get around that. Rook e1, castles, knight b5, okay. So keeping an eye on that pawn, actually hitting it directly. Knight c5, bishop f4, okay, and now hitting the f7 point. But black can survive just by playing knight e6. Now this is protected once more, and also f7, so wonderful move, knight e6. Here white wants to even give a rook for that knight because it's so strong, and then he also gets this bishop from c7. Very interesting theory here. Or I don't know if this is theory, but very interesting variation. Bishop f6, rook e1, putting pressure on this e6 pawn, although at the moment it's not in danger. But knight a7, okay, striking at the defender of this bishop, and this bishop activates itself. Here rook d8 or just knight takes b5 have been played. So that's something that could happen after d4. I think it can give a very interesting game where white is trying to get around that pawn, attack on the queen side, maybe even on this e file, and Black is trying to hold on to that pawn and just stop any counterplay from white, and maybe attack in the center later. Put pressure on the d3 pawn, which was the like root pawn from white, maybe. So black can also play c6 or e6, just protecting that pawn. Of course, now we can go to queen's gambit with d4, but more common is g3. It's trying to get these Réti type of positions. Knight f6, and okay, here d4 is, this is kind of Catalan type of position. So queen c2, quite common. Taking on c4, retreating back to c2, developing bishop, retreating the queen. This is very drawish. Coming back to c2. Okay, so this was a drawish line, but I'm not so interested in this variation. So let's see if we can have something instead of d4. b3 is very common, or also just queen c2. And here c5, and yeah, with e6 it's just naturally goes to these positions that resemble the Queen's Indian or Tarrasch defense, or some variations of that. Here just e3, knight c3, taking on d5. I guess black was threatening to open up this diagonal for the bishop with tempo, and taking here, and d4, getting rid of this cramped d2 pawn, and knight e5, very interesting move. Queen d6, this is highly drawish, but I guess it's easy to go wrong, even in this position. So, but both sides should be able to get a draw from here. Exchanging rooks, probably, and maybe dark square bishops and queens, and going into a drawn endgame. So is the situation any different after c6? This could become the Slav defense, of course, with d4, but I'm not interested in that. e3 or b3 from white are most common. If e3, then something quite standard like that. Let's look at b3. It's quite common that white fianchettos both of his bishops in the Réti opening. Here knight f6, but bishop g4 is even better. Knight d7, e3 anyway. e6, this pawn triangle. How does white deal with that? This is highly drawish. Castle. d4. White wants to play d4 at some point. Queen e7 is most common, but it doesn't look too good. I guess because of knight e5 having a more free game. So better for black here would be just rook e8, and here if knight e5, then well, black takes on e2 and knight f8, I guess getting ready to exchange this knight here, I guess. So really fighting for the center. Okay, so those were some stuff that can happen from the Réti opening. And there's not a lot of theory, so I think we explored more than most people know about this. So thanks for watching. Take care.